I'm author and critic David Agranoff. I'm a horror and science fiction author, critic, and researcher. In this podcast, I wanted to provide in-depth interviews and panel discussions with everyone from New York Times bestselling authors to researchers, musicians, and anyone I find interesting. Welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. Hello and welcome to another special episode of Postcards from a Dying World in our continued coverage of all things Star Trek. As they end season by season, I have assembled my normal bridge crew, no special guests today, to talk about Star Trek Lower Decks Season 4. However, before we get to that, I have a couple housekeeping things that I want to inform everyone of. First off, as many of you have already heard me talk about a bazillion times, my book, The Last Night to Kill Nazis, is out, and it is now currently supposed to be available nationwide at Barnes and Nobles. So look for it there, and if they don't have it, ask them, because it helps. Oh, yes, yeah, Nisa has his copy. He probably will never read. Because he's not.
I will read.
I'll check our Barnes and Noble and see if it's there.
Yes, and if they don't, then ask them to carry it, please. And then another book that I just got in the mail is Augmented Volume 1, which has my short story Happy Happy Click Click from Choir Publishing, who is going to be doing my next book, People's Park, which comes out in March of 2024, and we're going to have a big release party in Bloomington, Indiana for the day before the solar eclipse, April 7th. I'm working on the venue right now, and but if you want to save the date and be in Indiana, Issa's threatening to be there too. And look, I got a book release party. That's cool. But what's way cooler is the solar eclipse the next day. That's the thing you want to see. Issa, back me up on this.
Seeing totality is the coolest thing that I've ever seen. Like it was super cool. I highly recommend to everyone that you check it out. Don't go for like partial eclipse. Go to where the line of totality is going to be and check it out. It's amazing.
It will blow your mind. The way I always describe it is you've spent your entire life, every day of your life, you've seen the sky get progressively darker. You've never seen it just click out like a light switch. It will fry you.
It's like birds think it's nighttime and start making nighttime bird noises. Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. It's fantastic.
Yes. And then one other announcement I have to make, and I just want to apologize too. I did try to record this in the morning, but we had a couple mess ups, but the sun comes right in my window, right on my face at this time of day, this time of year. I tried to minimize it. We'll see what we can do. So the other thing I've got going on is there's this book from the 70s called the Science Fiction Hall of Fame, which has the members of the Science Fiction Writers SFWA, Science Fiction Writers of America, which is now international, but they still call it SFWA. Anyways, SFWA in 1975 voted on the 15 greatest Hall of Fame short stories of all time, according to those members through that time. And they published this book. There's no repeat authors. There's no Philip K. Dick, boo. No John Brunner, boo. But there are 15 stories, and I'm doing a series here on Postcards from a Dying World, where we're going to break down each of these stories one a month for the next year and change. And the first one is Mars Odyssey from Stanley Weinbaum from 1934. which is a groundbreaking story, and it's going to be Cora Bullard and Steve Davidson, the editor owner of Amazing Stories, talking about it. And then after that, you'll have to find out. However, I will tell you, this bridge crew is being drafted for one of the episodes because it became a Star Trek episode. And that means, Issa, you're going to have to read a short story. Sorry.
I love
It shouldn't be too bad. But the story that became Arena is in here. So we want to compare and contrast. So I've already got you guys in my notes that I'm going to draft you for that episode, but you got a little while before that. So anyways, I'm done with all that. My normal bridge crew. So if this is your first time, if you came here just for Lower Deck season 4, you might not know Sarah, Issa, and myself, but you can go back and listen to our coverage of basically every season of Star Trek and modern for the last, I don't know, like this is our 10th time doing it or something like that. It's crazy. But Sarah and Issa, I mean, I would assume most people know who I am because it's my podcast. But if not, I'm David Agranoff, the author of The Last Night to Kill Nazis. I already introduced my book. Sarah, who are you and what's your Star Trek cred? And briefly.
I am a Gen Xer who was 8 years old when TNG premiered, who loves the quote unquote new Trek, the Kurtzman era, if you will. Also have a soft spot for the Kelvin era. It has its wonders. And so I'm always arguing online because of it. Yeah. But
so I would consider Sarah to be a vocal Star Trek fan and somebody who is very active on, for example, like Star Trek shitposting and in the Star Trek community. Also a member of, goes to conventions and that kind of thing. So important Star Trek voice, in my opinion. And that's why I drafted her onto my bridge crew. And Issa, tell them who you are and what's your Star Trek cred.
All right. Well, let's see. I am someone who was always a science fiction nerd, and I always thought I was like a big Star Trek fan until recently. I feel like actually, you know what? I always thought of myself as a big Star Wars fan, a big Star Trek fan, etc. But recently, I've realized now that those things have become much more popular in popular culture. I barely scratched the surface of being a super fan. So I am now what you would consider like a casual enjoyer. Like, I watch it all and I mostly enjoy it. I'm a little I haven't felt 100% on all Star Trek recently, but I'm still a big fan and I love the concept of Star Trek. So I sound a little negative today compared to maybe previous times that we've done this. I've been a little bitter recently on across a wide variety of shows and universes, and that sort of led up to my watching of Lower Decks. So I'm coming in a little cynical. I'm just gonna throw that out there
Intriguing.
right now. David, I think you're muted.
Oh shoot, I did it. So here's the thing. I will admit that Lower Decks is, and it's not an anti-cartoon bias like some people. I love Prodigy. So I'm not anti-cartoon. I've just never been a huge fan of Lower Decks. It's something that I kind of feel like a little bit more of an obligation to watch than something that I enjoy. However, there is some things that I do appreciate about Lower Decks, and actually to get ahead of ourselves, I really liked the finale of this season a lot. And which is saying something because I'm not a big fan of the show. I do like the characters. I loved the crossover with Strange New Worlds. And thought, that was great. But let's get into it with maybe let's start with some overall feelings on the season before we start getting into the individual episodes, because and I'll just say this, like, I thought this was a pretty weak season of Star Trek in general, and as far as even Lower Decks, And Issa and I talked about this a little bit before offline, but I think the joke's getting old. It's not hitting as well anymore. And I think it seems like they're kind of working on rebooting the show a little bit. And I think that's good because I think even some of the things that I thought were very amusing about it in the beginning have just started to be like, okay, I get it. I get it. So that's how I'm feeling about things. And part of my problem is sometimes they'll have like what I consider to be really great ideas, and then I just don't like the execution. And we're going to talk a lot about the first episode, probably Tuvix, for many reasons, because as Sarah said, and I agree with her, I'll never get tired of the debate over Tuvix, the episode of Voyager that Issa is probably totally lost on. But
I'm familiar with the memes more than the actual episode.
Yeah. So that was an example of something that I thought that the concept was very bold and I just didn't like the execution so much. So Sarah, how did you feel about the season overall?
I think, when you were saying that you don't have an anti-cartoon bias, the first thing that popped into my head is I have an anti-density bias against Lower Decks. It is hard for me to watch this show, even though I enjoy it. And a lot of that comes from the density. And at first I thought it was purely the fact that the characters talk too fast, right? For my old ears, my 44-year-old ears, I was like, maybe it's just they talk too fast. If I could just slow it down, if I could watch it at 80% speed, I would probably be a lot happier. But one of the things that I was thinking about in watching the episodes and in thinking about what they did with the Tuvix episode, they just try to jam so much stuff in each 25-minute episode. And that's like, and there's so many things that would be better about it if they slowed it down a little bit and said, you know what, we're going to, and it isn't even necessarily the number of references, because a lot of the references are silent. A lot of them are just visual. They'll have an object, they'll have, a bat'leth in the background or something like that. Those are fine. But, with Tuvix, for example, there's like 6 different plot threads that are all individual Voyager references to 6 different episodes. And like, there's like half a season there, And so I think that the overall flaw of the show and why I enjoy it, and I enjoyed this season just as much as the others. Some episodes were stronger than others, but for the most part, I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it more than I enjoyed the last season of Strange New Worlds, which I have railed against. There were a couple of amazing episodes in Strange New Worlds last season and a lot of really bad ones. So I actually enjoyed this season of Lower Decks more than Strange New Worlds. But I do think that
That's crazy talk to me, but
I'm also with you on the crazy talk. I
yeah.
can't.
But I feel like there's too much, and that to me is the main flaw of the show, where it feels exhausting watching it. And I am its target audience. I have seen all of the Star Treks, and so it's too much, and it makes me sad because I really love what it's trying to be. I just think that it needs some restraint.
Issa?
I feel like that's interesting. So I'm less bothered by all the references because honestly, the Voyager ones, I just don't really know them. I've seen a lot of Voyager, but I definitely have not seen it twice, and I definitely don't remember all of it. So I didn't, it's just that stuff kind of rolls off me, I guess. It doesn't bother me. My biggest complaint, and I don't know if this was like a first episode complaint specifically, but I felt like at any point nothing important was gonna happen. Like, I don't know how to better explain it, but like the episodes are very predictable. Like there's not a lot of like once you know the characters, they kind of just all do the same thing every time. And like a lot of the structure is very predictable. So like this is a different episode. I don't want to jump ahead, but just for the example, like the cave episode was like very clear early on that they're all going to tell a flashback and then it's going to resolve. You know what I mean? Like it's just, there's not a lot of like surprise or like I feel like at any point I could turn it off, stop watching it, and I wouldn't have really missed anything, which sounds so harsh because there are some enjoyable parts for sure. It didn't I don't know, I don't mind the density. Like I think of shows like Arrested Development or something where there's like a million jokes and every time you watch it there's a new joke you pick up on. I don't mind that at
Not
all.
really the density of references, it's the density of plot, right? There'll be 4 plot lines, major plot lines, going through one 25, 30-minute episode.
Right.
Yeah, I think
I can see that.
There's a little bit of both for me as far as, I don't know. And for me, when we get into Tuvix, we'll get into part of my problem with the whole thing. But Issa, did you have anything else on the season in general?
It was so what was most interesting about it to me is the first 3 seasons were very much the same. And I think of them as like a sitcom where there was some character growth and you got to know the characters, but it was very sitcom-y where it sort of reset at the end of each one, kind of. This one, they tried a couple new things. One, Mariner kind of had a major character change arc that was sort of different than the previous seasons. Like she's growing as a character and taking things more seriously and clearly going somewhere. And they also tried to do like a plot line throughout the whole show with the disappearing ships. And so it was sort of like a season-long story arc attempt. I don't know if it was very well done, but that was the attempt. That was different. And it's like, so the first 3 seasons were kind of pretty static, sitcom-y, everything resets at the end. And then this season was like leading a transition to something new. And I'm really curious to see what the new thing is, because I imagine next season would be different. But we'll see.
One thing that was interesting to me, or was very funny, that was kind of Lower Decks adjacent that happened around this time is apparently IDF or whoever's doing the Star Trek comics right now did a mini series on Shax, the security guy, the Bajoran. And it's apparently like a super brutal Bajoran resistance fighting tale from his backstory. And it's like super intense and brutal. And it's like when you have the guy on the cartoon be like in a relationship with the Dr. Cat Lady thing and a really goofy character, it just cracked me up that they went and did this other thing in this other medium about this character, and that was very funny. That's kind of besides the point, but I just wanted to mention that before I forgot it because it just occurred to me. As far as the tone of everything and like how they're trying to connect things, I think you're right. They were, obviously they were doing the storyline with the connecting story and the mystery box kind of set up for that for this season. And I actually thought that paid off fairly well by reverse engineering it to one of the original Lower Decker stories of TNG, and that paid off very nicely. And when we get to the last episode, that's something that as a setup and payoff, parallels and reversals writer guy, I loved that, and I appreciate that. Now, as far as starting off the season with Tuvix, spelled differently, right? Basically starting off the season of Lower Decks by addressing the most hotly debated episode of Star Trek basically in the last 30 years is such a glorious middle finger of oh, you didn't think we'd go there. And obviously the idea that they started off the season with that and that they talked of being Tuvixed as a verb was great, and it was a self-awareness to what's going on in the Star Trek fan community. The fact that this Tuvix episode has never died down in the debate that people that you get a post about Tuvix where somebody makes a silly meme about Tuvix and it's going to be 400 comments on Facebook.
They have tried to shut down comments. They have tried to ban the subject entirely. in the groups. I believe the subject is banned again, and it goes through a phase where like it'll be banned again, and then somebody will try. And I think what happens is somebody makes a really great meme, and the admins just cannot help it. They cannot resist. So they let that one through. And then because that one is there, then other people start doing it again because the comment section is World War III. And then it gets turned off again.
Well, and I will tell you that speaking to Brandon Braga, who wrote the episode, when on this podcast, I brought up, I asked him about like, how do you feel about all the meme stuff and all that? And he's incredibly proud of the fact that people still debate the Tuvix thing.
Of course.
And I will tell you that his favorite, the guy who wrote it, his favorite is the one from The Orange is the New Black, where it has all their crimes, robbery, whatever. And then under Kate Mulgrews one, it just says Tuvix.
Yeah.
That is Brian Braga's favorite, according to him. And I do like that one. What's funny to me about the whole Tuvix debate and the fact that it continues and it goes on and that it gets into these things in part is, and we should explain in case anybody's been living under a Star Trek rock. If you're listening to this episode, you should understand and know what's going on in Star Trek. But in case you don't, it's an episode of Voyager from, I think, the 3rd or 4th season. It's somewhere around there. In this episode, a transporter accident separates or takes Tuvok and Neelix and puts them together. And now I don't know how Issa feels about this, but I know Sarah and I are on the same page that we believe Janeway was right. But it turned into this debate over whether, because Janeway makes the decision to separate them in the transporter, which effectively ends the life of Tuvix, the character who was only created by the transporter accident. But because it takes time to figure out how to undo him, he starts to have a life and have a thing. And then he feels that he's being murdered. So one of the things that is interesting when you watch this episode of Lower Decks is that I kept thinking of it, well, I'm watching this as a person who thinks that Janeway was right. But if you watch it being a person who thinks Janeway murdered Tuvix, which makes no logical sense, by the way, then it's a totally different episode, right? And the idea that they're like, I'm not going to let you Tuvix me, right, is hilarious that they did this. The density problem is where the Tuvix episode of Lower Decks goes wrong. Because once they start like trying to turn it into like a tribal thing where there's 100 people getting Tuvixed and doing all this stuff, you lost me. The first half,
I really liked that part.
Here's the thing, though.
Yeah.
That part. Okay, so one of the things that happens in the groups since the Lower Decks Tuvix episode came out, it's hilarious, is that the people who are against Janeway's decision, the wrong people, they're
wrong. Yes.
They're wrong. They're like, well, obviously Lower Decks came to the same conclusion as me. And I was like, did you watch the episode? Did you watch after the first 5 minutes? Because in the first 5 minutes, Mariner just kind of jokingly says, oh yeah, Janeway like murdered that guy. And then that's apparently the only part of the episode that they watch, right? Because the whole rest of the episode is actually saying, hey, horrible things might have happened if we had allowed this guy to continue, if, Janeway had made another decision. And so in the end, Lower Decks comes to the same conclusion that Janeway did, which to me seems to suggest they're saying, nope, Janeway did the right thing. But the second half of that episode, I think, was very valid. What I didn't think was valid was the whole thing about the infectious, what was it? The other subplot that was happening in that episode, with the like entity or whatever, and the black and white episode of Voyager that they were referencing, because all of that, like, you had enough meat that you could have made that entire episode about the Tuvix problem, and it would have been amazing, right? And instead they had, they had that as the dominant story, but then they had all these other sub stories that really didn't, necessarily need to be in there. And it was great that they made a Voyager centric episode, because there's so many episodes that are referencing other series, especially, in the other shows themselves that are referencing other series. And Voyager just often doesn't get that treatment. So it was really nice to see that. But, so much in there.
Yeah. And for me, like the first half, like I thought if they had just gone to have two characters just do it and not like turn it into like a Tribble thing, for me, I think you would have been commenting on Voyager and doing the whole thing without like overdoing it. And then like, and there's still ways to make it very, very funny and slapsticky. I just didn't think they needed to go all Tribble-y on it. And I will agree with you, Sarah, that it is awesome to see Voyager get that treatment, not just here, but with like the Tom Paris plates and the, references to Tom Paris and all that we will get to in the last episode. But like the fact that Voyager is getting that kind of love now shows like kind of a change in attitude and things. And I appreciated that. Now, as somebody who hasn't seen the original episode, have you seen Tuvix before, Issa? Like,
I don't think I've ever seen it. I don't think I've seen the episode, but I feel like I've read about it so many times that it feels like I've seen it, but I don't think I actually have.
Okay, so here's the thing. In theory, Issa, you could go and watch this episode, and the episode would make sense to you without having any knowledge about Voyager, right? If you were to go watch that episode, it's a great standalone episode. The only problem is that it might unintentionally give you a bias in terms of picking a side, because you won't know enough about the characters of Neelix and Tuvok as individuals.
Oh, no, 100%
care about them as individuals in order to have that opinion, right, about what it means for their individuality to be destroyed by this entity.
I don't think you need that. I think 100% Janeway's right. It doesn't matter. There's no legitimate argument.
Well, you should watch it then, and then let us know.
The debate is stupid, and
it's really
Sarah and I agree on that. And we have teamed up before in threads to argue on the side of right that Janeway was right. I do want to share screen on one thing that I do think is hilarious, which is that somebody did this.
Yeah.
At the Janeway statue. And by the way, Mary Beth, shout out to Mary Beth, and I know she does listen to these shows. She's one of the founders of the Janeway Collective. Did not find this funny.
This is what female leaders have to go through, man. Like the Tuvix thing is to Star Trek what Benghazi is to Hillary Clinton. Like there's a whole nothing burger that happened, where she gets blamed for shit because she's a woman in power, not because she actually did anything wrong, and made the same decisions that men in her position would have made, and gets uniquely shat upon because she's a female leader.
Absolutely, 200% agree. And the whole Tuvix controversy to me is just absolutely bananas, because like it's very clear and obvious that she made the right decision. And I kind of pressed Brandon when I talked to him about this, and then he was like, at this point he doesn't want to give an opinion.
Of course.
I mean, he wrote Janeway making that decision, so we know where he comes down on it.
Look, the only other thing you could say is they could separate them, and if they were like, hey, we want to be put back together, then go for it. You know what I mean? But like, there's no argument for not separating them. It makes no sense.
It makes no sense. It is absolutely ridiculous. It is literally the dumbest debate in the Star Trek community, and it's hilarious that Lower Decks like went at it. It's
a really good setup. It's like another similar example, moralistically, I guess, or whatever, is the MCU did it with the blip, right? Like they were like, we can't just go back to 5 years ago because all this stuff has happened in the last 5 years. Like, I've had a baby. I don't want to get rid of the baby and go back 5 years. So they brought everyone forward. That was cool.
Whatever. Yeah. We're right. And I think it was there's some, I think it's been 10 weeks since I watched the first episode of this season, but it doesn't Mariner say like, oh no, she straight up murdered him. So like they have people like putting forward the anti Janeway argument in the episode, but which they had to do. They had to have somebody take that side, at some point. But
then she basically changes her mind when she realizes what craziness would have been unleashed. And the beauty of that last half of that episode, it's not that they were trying to tribble it. It's that they were suggesting that the moral implication of allowing Tuvix to live meant a destruction of individuality. It meant that, just constantly joining and constantly homogenizing species is a loss of individuality. It's the same thing as the Borg. And that's one of the things that, you try to argue with the people who have the other opinion about, where you're like, hey, Tuvok and Neelix had individuality. They had their own lives. That matters. And every single time they want to believe, well, they were dead. And it's a lot like people who are anti-abortion sort of insisting that these are human babies and not just embryos, right? And so they sort of decide that, well, they were dead, and so therefore they're bringing them back to life or something, when that's not the case. But Mariner admits in the end that basically because of what happens, that everybody would make the same decision, and I think that's awesome.
Right? Yeah, she does, and like anybody who thinks that Kirk or Picard would have done something different, like, come on. It was the right call. And by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, like, there are people also who got mad that Janeway got technically made an admiral before Picard, and which is hilarious that there are people who are upset about that, but they were. But Janeway got a ship back from the other side of the galaxy, and that is an accomplishment that you get made admiral instantly when you do that, right?
Yeah, she went full Shackleton.
Yeah.
So Picard, was sort of indirectly responsible for murdering a whole bunch of Federation people while he was taken over by the Borg. So that's
so the Locutus thing will hold you back a little bit. Yeah.
Slows down the career track a bit,
Yeah, exactly. And people on the and we know that people in the Enterprise don't want to take they don't want to get kicked upstairs because they don't want to leave the Enterprise. So, and we saw this with Riker. So whatever. Anyways, but the Tuvix thing, yeah, and so they did. Now, one of the things they did this season, what they do with a lot of seasons, they did 2 episodes right out of the bat. So I guess it was 9 weeks ago that I watched this. Whatever. And the second one, I have no bones yet. I must scream. I love that that's a reference to Harlan Ellison, even though Harlan Ellison was kind of a dickhead to deal with as a real human being. He was a fantastic writer, and I like the reference. But again, here's where we get into, if we start going into these episodes, there's not really much that I remember about this episode. I know it's the one where Mariner is like trying to get from being promoted, and has the whole thing with Ransom, and
the
has
Moopsie episode.
The Moopsie, yeah, there was the Moopsie, which I was not a huge fan of, but I know Moopsie was funny, but didn't do much.
That did nothing for me. I'm not a fan of that kind of stuff. That didn't work.
Moopsie immediately became a huge meme thing. Okay, a huge meme thing.
Yeah,
huge.
Yeah, and that doesn't necessarily make it actually good, but it makes it amusing in public. And I think the one with Pike saying deploy the Moopsie was pretty funny, but that's as far as, it didn't really do much for me. So I don't know, as far as episode 2, if there was, I do think that that's where you start to see the character growth with Mariner. So that's kind of a thing, I guess. But here again, I feel like a lot of these episodes go into the like, oh, we're doing a landing party and we're, you know, which is a problem with all of Star Trek. So if you don't come up with things to make them very different, you know, they're gonna kind of leak together. So I don't know if anybody has anything on episode 2 that they really want to hammer home.
I just want to defend Moopsie because the thing
course you do.
about Lower Decks that I love so much is the fact that you can have all of these completely fantastical aliens because you're not constrained by budget, you're not constrained by what you can realistically depict, and to a certain extent, because humor is the genre here, you actually don't have to really worry about realism to the same degree that you would in normal Star Trek, which is already, normal Star Trek is already about willing suspension of disbelief. But with Lower Decks, they can really push it to the point of absurdity. And that's what I love about Whoopsie. Like, you have this very, very adorable, cuddly, cute creature that liquefies and sucks the bones from your body, which is just great on principle, which is why it became a meme, because people love, you know, the absurdity of it combined with the fact that it's adorable.
See, that's where I have my anti-cartoon bias, because I feel like if they didn't have the cheap out to just do whatever they wanted, they'd have to actually put some thought into it and make it better. That's harsh, I know, but that's, you know, also, you know, we've all seen the cute animal that becomes a crazy killer thing. That's not like a new invention there, you know what I mean?
I'm not saying it's a new invention. I'm saying that the way that they did it worked for me because it was absurd.
Well, and it's not like live action Star Trek didn't. It's not like season 3 of Picard didn't have an attack tribble on Daystrom Station that went against the window too. So, and I may or may not have been rewatching season 3 of Picard recently in order to remember that. But you know, sometimes you just got to put on something you can fall asleep to. But that being said, yeah, the Moopsie thing, I don't know, it's funny, but again, like, it didn't drive me on anything. I will say, episode 3, where Boimler leads his first away mission, was I did find that pretty amusing, because I do, you know, the idea that he would like take it way too seriously is actually something I could see like a Starfleet person doing. And I did think that whole storyline with him, like, you know, wanting to risk his life for everybody else, you know, and like, you know, not letting anybody do anything because he wanted to do everything, was actually kind of funny commentary on how I think Starfleet probably would be. I bet you'd have a lot of people like that. You'd have to be like, yo, let me do my job, you know. And so I like that. What do you guys have any feelings on this alien megastructure episode?
Yeah, because like you know, one of the things that's interesting about the concept of Lower Decks is that they very intentionally wanted to make us feel like these are sort of regular people who are Star Trek crew, right? Starfleet crew. But at the same time, it's basically canon that getting into Starfleet is a big deal, right? You have to be a smart person. It'd be like, you know, the equivalent of getting into Harvard or something. And so it's like there's this weird mix in Lower Decks where it's like, on the one hand, you have to be a very smart person to be in Starfleet, and on the other hand, some of these characters are acting like idiots a lot, right? And so I think that this is one of those episodes where it, you know, they played with that a little bit, because it, you know, you would have a bunch of control freaks in that kind of environment. You would have a lot of perfectionists and people who, you know, were sort of jockeying for power and control because they wanted desperately to control the situation. So I think that was actually really well done.
Well, and that's the suspension of disbelief, right? Because like, I have a hard time believing anybody as self-absorbed as Ransom is going to become a first officer, or, you know, I can't think of Shax as this once, you know, Bajoran resistance fighter who survived a genocide and then, you know, is fucking the cat doctor, you know, like in the holodeck, right?
You
And
have to admit that that's part of the intentional humor, though, right? Is that
right.
they
Well, that's
have these wild side opposing sides to their characters, and that's what makes the humor work.
right. And so there's a certain degree that, the way I use it kind of justified in my head is Lower Decks is to the Star Trek universe what like Cheers is to our universe, right? It's a sitcom in that universe. And like, I don't know, there are real bars in Boston, right? And there are real California class ships in Star Trek. And so somebody's, and yes, if Starfleet has that hundreds and hundreds of ships, right? And then there's going to be one that's going to kind of collect a bunch of weirdos and fuck ups. And in that regard, I can live with that.
It
But
also reminds me of Legally Blonde a lot, because you have this environment where it's Harvard and you have somebody that's supposed to be stupid,
right.
that's who's also smart, and that same kind of humor, it reminds me of Legally Blonde a lot.
Episode 3, Issa, anything in particular?
No, I enjoyed it. It was like it was good character development. Like I thought that was a good. I liked Boimler overdoing it. I thought it was the rebooting the computer was cute. It was good.
All right, so episode 4 was the Orion wedding road trip episode, and I thought some of the setup of that one was pretty cute, but and I saw just today somebody posted something about how like Lower Decks is like kind of deepened the Orion culture and how it's affecting other shows. And specifically, they were talking about the fact that the Orion captain in Strange New Worlds looks to the slave woman next to him to get directions before saying anything to Pike. And I hadn't noticed that, but that's something that it kind of goes to, and a lot of people have joked that was Tendy's grandma on that ship because like of what they were setting up and those old scientists and I think the way that Lower Decks is deepening the Orion culture is kind of interesting because they're doing it through comedy, but also like retroactively taking one of the most sexist things in the original Star Trek, the Orion slave women, and like turning it into like that they were actually powerful all along is an interesting and funny side thing. And I will give Lower Decks a lot of credit for pulling that off in Star Trek because it's taking one of the most sexist things in the original Star Trek and and kind of and doing something empowering with it for the characters. Yeah. So as far as like the Orion wedding and I can't remember the Vulcan character's name, but they're doing lots of really good things with her, and they're actually making her into a character that I know people like, and we're excited that she's sticking around. And I'm glad that they don't have her like suddenly talking faster as a Vulcan or whatever. They have her talking like a Vulcan and doing all that. And that's it kind of makes like kind of the fast talk and everything else going around her. It actually kind of grounds it a little bit, and I like that. And as far as Tendi and her growth, and we know how this turns out in the final episode, but it made me Tendi is one of the characters that I like most in Lower Decks. And I love that she could be this powerful Orion woman, but she just wants to fucking be in Starfleet and nerd out on science, and it was really sad in the last episode when Rutherford's like, well, maybe they'll let her science.
Yeah. Like that's one of the things that I thought was so charming about that episode is that it wasn't all that out of place for her character when you really thought about it, because she's always been kind of casual, like, again with Legally Blonde, like, oh, like it's hard, like she has this very like badass, adorkable quality to her where she's sort of highly, highly good at everything, but in this very adorable way. And so it just tracked. It made sense for her character that she has a backstory.
And it makes her different from the other lower deckers in the sense that, like with her, well, maybe her and Mariner, in the sense that they could be on a faster track. They could be doing these things. They're not as awkward, but they like being where they're at.
Yeah.
It's like they like, I kind of likened it as that they could sit at the cool kids table, but they like sitting with the nerds,
Yeah.
and that makes Tindy, and especially, well, that's something that you have with Mariner because it's Leto. And look, Issa and I are straight edge, so I don't know how much some of the let's get drunk stuff like works. It doesn't work for us,
Not at all.
but it is kind of funny, and I do think I do think it's part. I think this idea that they did this like ladies road trip to the wedding was a neat concept, and it was good that it was an episode that I kind of found a little charming before the next one that I absolutely despised with the Passion of 10 Burning Suns, which is the
hold on, let me talk about this episode a little bit. So this was actually my favorite episode of the season, maybe the finale, but I really like this one because Tandy is also my favorite character, and I loved the like fish out of water code switching between like Orion and Orion royalty and whatever. It was great. I thought that was all really well done. And the gag of Mariner getting repeatedly stabbed for some reason was just absolutely hilarious to me. That was the funniest thing they did the whole season, I thought. So I really enjoyed that one.
Okay.
And the Mark Twain thing was adorable. That was really
not like the Mark Twain. The Mark Twain thing was funny for like once.
Yeah, the fact that they brought that back was
it was like, so it's one of those jokes where they just thought it would get funnier as it keeps going, and clearly that worked for some people. But
I have a soft spot for the Mark Twain shit. Okay,
just the amount of screen time devoted to that was so off the charts. I was shocked.
Yeah, the Twain thing didn't work for me either. And look, I'm not anti Mark Twain, and I'm also not. I actually like Time Zero, the episode, with Picard and Twain and all that. But like the joke didn't really land for me. So I've got to say I'm with Issa on that one. It just didn't land with me. And the fact that they brought it back was just like, oh my God, come on. But
they brought it back a few times. Like
they brought it back for me. Okay.
Yeah, they did do that for you. All right, now an episode I absolutely despised. Number 5, the empathological fallacies. This is the one with the Beta Z diplomats. Like, first of all, the Betas, as much awesome work as they did to deepen the culture of Klingons and Vulcans, the Beta Z thing is all over the place in Star Trek culture because, first of all, like they were occupied during the Dominion War, which is like a really interesting thing that they've never really explored, but it's just like offhandedly mentioned that the Battle of Beta Z, and they were occupied and they're empaths and all that. But everything gets boiled down to these comedy things of like that, and it's all based on. And part of my problem with it is the Majel Barrett of it all. At the time, the whole thing with Loxana Troy was that Gene Roddenberry forced his wife onto the show, basically. And there's, if you know the backstory about how all the producers thought the Loxana like sex pot storyline and all that, and that she wanted to sleep with Picard, was all stuff everyone hated, but Gene Roddenberry fought for. And so the fact that this whole episode is based on this thing that was Gene Roddenberry when he shouldn't still be doing Star Trek because he probably wasn't healthy enough, like forcing this storyline, and then it turns into this thing like And then I just thought that storyline was just stupid. And it felt like we already kind of did this in the season with when everybody went Tuvixy at the end. I felt like, and then it just felt like Naked Now. And just a lot of it just felt like, I don't care how out of character you're being because you're being forced by this alien thing. Like, it just seems stupid. It didn't work for me. I didn't laugh. I just sat there like cold, like watching it, going like, "Oh my god, please end." I hated this episode. So
That's so funny. I watched this one it took me 3 sittings to get through the whole thing. And it's like a 25-minute episode. So like I could do like 8 minutes and then I was like, I gotta turn this off. Like it definitely just did not do anything for me at all.
I mean, I saw a lot of basketball scores during this episode. So fully, I admit I was distracted. I wasn't, whatever was going on. All right, Sarah, are you going to defend this one or did you hate it too?
First of all, it was worth the price of admission just for the hat that said it's Romulan ale o'clock somewhere. That was hilarious. Okay, I'm gonna get that printed on a t-shirt, even though I don't drink, because I find it hilarious. But I liked it and I didn't like it, but there were certain things I liked about it. But the thing is, I loved Loxana Troy when I was a kid. And I think the reason why I did is because I was not used to seeing, child of the 80s, born in the 70s. And I didn't see characters like that, women characters like that in popular culture ever. Right. And so the idea that, and, part of the thing is that what happens in Star Trek all the time is that something will happen that for its time has this progressive element to it that just doesn't necessarily age well. And the Loxana character for me is like that because in the 90s or the 80s, there was this, well, both decades really, there was this very appealing thing about older women acting like the way that men act, the way that very confident men act, as a rebellion. And the first time I had ever seen that archetype was Loxana Troy. And then it became, it popped up in other forms of popular media. But to me, she was an empowering character in the 80s and in the 90s. And
Fair
so
enough.
I will always have a soft spot for her. And I defend it all the time because it's one of those things that also gets sort of mocked a lot in Star Trek shit posting and a lot of the forums. And she's considered sort of, there's like memes where she's just sitting there like on Picard's lap where it just says like daughter of the fifth house, bitch. And she's still sort of like a feminist icon. So I love her. I have a soft spot for her. And because of that, I enjoyed various aspects of this episode. It wasn't my favorite of the season, but I did enjoy it as a baseline.
I also really liked Loxana as a character. I thought she was a great foil for Picard, and I thought it was hilarious. I enjoyed all of her episodes.
Well, and that's fair enough. And I'm not saying like I despise them, but it's hard for me to kind of divorce like what I know about. And partially, it was funny because Loxana Troy episodes were fucking nightmares for the people who made the show.
Yeah.
Partially because it's the boss's wife.
Right.
And, if they start saying like, hey, I'm not sure that joke works or whatever. And then it's like, Gene, And
she did a really good job. I mean, the woman was a good actress because you see the range that she had in all of the characters she had throughout Star Trek's history. She had a lot of range. So,
and she was the voice of the computer for forever. And I'm not saying I'm just saying I know too much about the fact that it was a nightmare doing those episodes, and it's hard for me to divorce that. I did not personally like the Loxana Troy episodes when I was a kid. and I like them better now. And there's a couple of them that I do like the whole foil aspect to Picard. Now, that being said, this episode and the whole thing, like, there's a part of me that's like, just like, all Ferengis are greedy and all Klingons are angry, and want to fight, and then all like Betazoids want to get it on or whatever. Like, it just reduces, like, I like to see every once in a while when Star Trek can like have characters that, for example, like when they introduced the Alexander's mother, and she was a Klingon that was like not into Klingon culture, right? And she was like, I hate all that shit, was great, and I was kind of hoping when they brought when the 4 Betazoids were introduced into the episode, I was hoping that they were going to be something different, and instead, like, the fact, I don't know, the episode just didn't work for me. Maybe that I just like the idea of a bunch of like drunk Starfleet officers and whatever is.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because the whole point of the show is to bring up previous tropes that in some cases are 30, 40 years old and modern, right? And so they probably have to sort of tread a fine line between them wanting to do their own new things with these characters, with these aliens, but also the whole point of the show is to reference the tropes of these shows that we all grew up with. So
yeah, and to have it back to back with a Ferengi episode was like, just for me personally, just what I like and don't like about Star Trek. I was just like, I remember around this time I posted something on Facebook saying, like, is in relation to Lower Decks, like, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? Why am I watching this? I don't enjoy it. And whether it's fair or not fair, I kept watching, and there were episodes that I ended up liking. However, that's just a thing. Like, back to back, you did basically a Loxana Troy episode updated with a Ferengi episode, and I hated Loxana Troy episodes when I was a kid, and I was not a huge fan of Ferengi episodes when Deep Space Nine happened, although there's a couple that are amazing.
I've always hated the Ferengi. That's been my biggest Star Trek. That was why I didn't watch Deep Space Nine. I just hated the Ferengi.
Right. So, and then episode 5 here, we go to, it's Parth's Ferengi's Heart Place, and then we go to the Ferenginar. And on a comedy show of all the planets to go to, I think, and look, I at least laughed a couple times in this episode, and it's kind of a stealth sequel to Deep Space Nine. You've got Lita and Rom being the Grand Nagus, which, is kind of one of the most unbelievable parts at the end of Deep Space Nine, that Rom becomes the Nagus. But, it's one of those parts of Deep Space Nine that just never, you just kind of, for whatever reason, you just gotta go with that. And so for them to do a sequel to that, it's kind of funny. And the fact that, the restaurant's called Lobes is funny. And there's a couple things. I mean, I at least laughed in this episode. And if you're going to do a Ferengi episode on the funny cartoon show, that's where you're going to do it. Right. So, Issa, if you hated Ferengi, did you like this episode?
I liked Boimler watching TV and being like, they put the ads in the episode. Like, that was great. That was very, very funny. But aside from that, I don't know. It didn't, this honestly, like you sort of said it earlier, why am I watching this? I know why I was watching this. I was watching this to do this podcast. Like, I feel like I need to get meta for a second and step out and just talk about a couple other things. But so my biggest problem is I sat through Secret Invasion, the Marvel show, like, just out of like whatever you want to call it, like just inertia of liking Marvel stuff. And it was like the most boring, worst thing I've ever seen in my life. And I was so mad that I watched the whole thing. And so I went straight from that to Lower Decks, and I was just kind of like, God, another thing that I just would never watch or shouldn't ever watch. And I know that's not fair and it doesn't reflect on Lower Decks, but I just feel like all these there's a lot of content coming out for a lot of these franchises, and it's not always as good as it could be, and so I need to be more subjective in what I force myself to watch.
Well, I will say that
I didn't make you watch Secret Invasion. I did not.
Do not
I think
watch. It's
this
terrible.
episode would have been a non-starter for somebody who hasn't seen DS9, right?
Yeah.
And so if you are already somebody who's like, one of the reasons why I don't watch DS9 is because I don't like Ferengi. Well, they did something completely different with the Ferengi in Deep Space Nine than they did with TNG. And really, in TNG, it was really stupid that they created an entire alien race just for comic relief.
Well, they didn't. They created them to be like the big scary people, and then
They just weren't.
Scary. It just didn't work.
I mean, but the thing is,
time.
when they say that, they're lying, because there's no way that you make comical looking, short, funny characters like that and not immediately know what you are doing.
Well,
There's
You know how you do it? You know how
I
you
think
do
they are lying, and they are trying. Like I think it was trying to be
No,
both. I
you
think
have-
that's the issue.
You have Gene
Like-
Roddenberry past his time when he's sitting there saying like things like, they don't have conflict in Starfleet. No, everyone
Right.
gets along. They've gotten past conflict.
Right.
And then you have him say, at the same time, you have the same guy that's at that point in his life, creativity wise, like, okay, like when he's like, oh yeah, these Ferengi, they look scary. They and then that's how you end up with that.
I felt that it was super anti-Semitic as well. Like I felt like some of that was in there too. That was always my take on the Ferengi. So, I don't know. I was never a fan.
Yeah, well,
either way, I think it's fair to say that you have to sort of admit that when there's a Deep Space Nine centric episode, if you haven't watched Deep Space Nine, it might be good to just skip that episode, but it's unfortunate that there's not like a little cheat sheet in the beginning, the way that they have trigger warnings, where it's like, this episode is 80% DS9 references and 20% TNG references. So if you didn't watch Deep Space Nine, you should probably
I feel like I watched enough Deep Space Nine to get the feel for it. Like it wasn't like it was like Quark's Bar and all that stuff. Like it wasn't. The Ferengi didn't seem super different than what they did on TNG.
Well, that's the thing. Like it happened in the last three quarters of that show. It wasn't in the first two seasons.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Someday I'll get around to it.
Yeah, well, it's at some point. And look, I wasn't anti-Ferengi episodes in DS. I think Little Green Men, the one where Quark's ship crashes in Roswell, is absolutely one of the best comedy episodes Star Trek ever did. I mean, like that episode is hilarious, and the woman that played Frank Black's wife on Millennium is in that episode. So, as a person who thinks that the first season of Millennium is one of the best things on TV ever, I appreciate that. But
wait,
yeah,
Millennium, the missing plane show?
No, it's the Canadian.
It's the spinoff of the X-Files.
Yeah,
Millennium.
Huh.
Yeah, with
a movie called Millennium that was the missing plane thing. Was that what I'm thinking?
No, Millennium
was plane show was terrible.
Millennium was a Chris Carter show that he created after when X-Files was like at its peak, and he wanted to do a show that felt like Seven every week, like the movie Seven. And so Bishop, the guy who played Bishop, Lance Hendrickson from Aliens, plays an FBI investigator who can like basically profile in his mind. And that first season is incredible. And then
I'm thinking of a very bad movie from the 80s.
The first season is incredible.
A different show entirely, so it's all good.
Yeah, you should. Everyone should see that first season of Millennium. And then the second season is terrible, but it has one episode that is fucking hilarious, that is great and genius. And then the third season is a mess when they tried to fix it. And then they ended up doing the final episode in X-Files, which is true. They crossed it over with X-Files to do the final episode because they weren't able to finish it. But yeah, anyways, Millennium. Total sidetrack. I should probably cut that out of this episode. But episode 7 of Lower Decks, a few badgies more. I might surprise you guys in saying that I really liked this episode. And the reason why I really like this episode is because I think it's a really clever, like all the fact that Daystrom has a room full of the supercomputers is a hilarious knock at Star Trek.
But we've seen that, haven't we seen that room before? Like that wasn't the first time.
The one where they put the Jeffrey Combs computer in there, yes. And I liked that they were like that the two computers are falling in love or sort of, and then like I thought this one was actually really, really smart satire of Star Trek. And that's why I liked this one, because I think if you had done the first half of Tuvix or in stuff like Few Badgies More, and then the last episode where it feels a little closer to Star Trek, but is spoofing Star Trek and making fun of Star Trek, that would be my sweet zone. That's where I think you're doing better. But with the fast talking, the overdoing the reference, the overstuffing everything, and having too many plots, and having it not feel like, because the thing is, I think my problem with what you were, and where I agree with you, Sarah, in a way, is that all that overstuffing makes it not feel like Star Trek. It doesn't ever feel like it has room to breathe. And one of the reasons why I like that last episode is I kind of felt like there was room to breathe. But more importantly, I do think that this Few Badgies More is one that like nails satirizing Star Trek. And that's why I like this episode. Thoughts on this episode? Anything?
I have to give a quick aside. So I Googled Millennium to try to remember the movie that I was thinking of. And it's actually a movie from 1989 starring Chris Christopherson and Cheryl Ladd. But it was written, here's where this gets interesting, by John Varley, the science fiction author. And I like his books a lot. So good times. But the movie was not very good, as I recall.
No, it was not. The TV show was. Few Badgies More. Issa, you have any thoughts?
No, that was fine. Wait, which one are we talking about? Are we talking about Badgie, or are we talking about the
supercomputers? The one with the
that was cute. It had its moments. I still feel like it was generally just kind of very predictable, and at no point did I not kind of know what was going to happen, you know. But it was fine. It was okay.
I think that's unavoidable with this kind of style, because you know, if it's going to be the way that Star Trek works in general, it's going to be predictable. If it you know, there's really no way to prevent that.
Yeah,
maybe. I feel like it could be a little more complex somehow. I don't know. It's hard to. It is hard to put my finger exactly on what I do. What doesn't speak to me about this. I have some. So, okay. This is the theory, right? So in any satire, you eventually run out of source material. Like you end up going back for like the greatest hits of what's funny, because you've had 3 seasons. You've already taken all the funniest stuff you can think of, the most obvious stuff, the best ideas, those have all been used. And at some point you need to do something different, or it gets really boring. And so I feel like they sort of fall into that trap of we don't know what else to do,
Well,
this is why people hated Discovery, though. And when I say people, I mean the people who are wrong, because Discovery is amazing and beautiful and fantastic. I love it. Okay. But the people who complained about Discovery, they came along and they said, we're going to make an episode of Star Trek where the opposite thing happens that you think is going to happen. Somebody is going to challenge authority, and instead of saving the day, saving the country, saving the planet, it's all going to go bad, right? And people freaked out, because what they want in Star Trek is they want predictability. They want the happy ending. They want the sort of, manufactured packaged humanism. And so when you give people that, they complain endlessly is the thing.
Well, and you definitely don't make the Klingons look different. That was a mistake.
How
Yeah,
dare
guys,
they
I'm
look like
sorry,
actual aliens?
I have a neighbor here and I have to go give them something. I'll be right back. Sorry.
no, Sarah and I will we'll start Caves without you. Um, Caves was an episode that I kind of like the idea that, they're making fun of the idea that Star Trek has all these cave sets. So they had to make use of that. And at the beginning, I thought that was a good idea, but I think the execution was just a little simplistic by, like, oh, just here's a flashback to the time that I was in a cave. And I
mean,
yeah, I didn't dig the writing in this episode. This episode just didn't do anything for me. I liked the general concept. I would see where they were starting to go from, but I think there was a way to do a clever version of like the caves thing. But
I feel like, there's some talk about whether or not Lower Decks is going to continue. And it's up in the air, right? The people the showrunners were kind of like, look, this might not get renewed this time. And I think one of the things that if it is renewed, that I would like to see in general with the show is somebody needs to come in and say, okay, everything that's happening on Lower Decks is great. We love all the references. We love the fact that we're, sort of this very meta show that's making fun of and celebrating this 60-year-old show. However, each episode also needs to function like an episode with a story, a singular story, hopefully. And it has to also, you have to be able to watch this show knowing almost nothing about Star Trek and feel like there was a beginning, a middle, and an end where, an actual plot happened, because that often gets missing from Lower Decks, because you feel like there's no stakes, that everything's just kind of endless references. And it's almost like the show itself has ADHD, and you need somebody to come in there and say, we're going to need to sort of bring somebody who's neurotypical in to keep the storylines in place, because it's just all over the place. And so I loved this episode on principle, but I agree, like you kind of, and one of the things that worked about it is that they were referencing not just Caves episodes, but the fact that each person kind of had their own Caves episode and memories. That's great conceptually. However, if it doesn't work as its own story, it's going to get super old super fast.
Yeah, I agree. And I have a feeling that well, I mean, Issa already said that he didn't like the flashback part of it. And yeah, I don't know. I just again, I felt like there wasn't much to it. And I can tell you, like, and one thing about Lower Decks too is I don't engage in Lower Decks the way I do other Star Trek shows. I don't read a lot of the commentary online. I don't watch, Trek culture breakdowns or screen crush breakdowns for these, like I do, like for Ahsoka, right? For each episode of Ahsoka or whatever. I just watch it and it's done, and I move on. And part of it is because I will admit, it just doesn't feel as Star Trek to me. And it just doesn't. And I don't feel some of the weight of it. And Caves is an example of an episode where okay, let's get it over with. And now I'm sort of distracted while it's going, and I maybe laugh, and I didn't laugh much. Here's the other thing too. At least in the first couple seasons, even in episodes that I didn't like, I at least had one laugh out loud moment.
What did we talk about Cave so far? David, you were frozen for a very long time there. I don't know what happened.
Oh, I'm sorry. So let me just go back to that. Caves is one of the first episodes where I completely disengaged. I didn't laugh. Nothing made me laugh in this episode. Nothing. And when it was over, like at the beginning, when I saw what the concept was, I was like, oh, this is a funny thing to make fun of Star Trek for. The fact that they always have,
See, David, I don't know if you can hear us, but we just heard that you didn't like caves and then you froze. I think you're having a kind of internet issue.
yeah,
Hopefully, it's not recording me and Sarah just like laughing when you're frozen.
it probably will.
It probably will.
We're like, look at his face.
Well, actually, what it does is it records each person from their origin.
Nice. So we didn't say anything bad. Don't worry.
Oh no, we did that when you went to go talk to your neighbor.
Oh, nice. Yeah, excellent.
Well, hopefully it cleared up. I don't know what was causing.
Yeah, you're back now. But I thought caves there was one funny part, and that was a conspiracy theory guy that Boimler was trapped with. I thought that was really funny. That's what they want you to think. Like, that was cute. Just very apropos, like America 2023, you know. But yeah, I agreed. It was the concept was funny. Like, oh great, we're stuck in a cave again. This happens all the time. Like, that's funny. But I don't know if there was a whole episode worth of jokes there.
Yeah. Could have been an A or B storyline or a B storyline and yeah. All right, so Inner Fight was the Captain Freeman episode where she's giving them the kind of safe, easy missions, and Mariner's getting mad like because she wants to be in danger or whatever. And so we're getting into the mother-daughter thing, and
Sarah's going full Sith Lord to have this conversation.
Yeah. I like this episode. Okay. I liked it better than Caves. I laughed a couple times. I do think there's more story here than 24 minutes worth. So there was a lot of jamming where I think and this was written by series creator Mike McCammon. I think that's how you say his name. And I think he was sitting on top of the suitcase to get everything inside of it. But other than that, I like this episode.
Honestly, I watched it this morning, just like an hour, a couple hours before we started this, and I don't really remember what happened in that episode versus what happened in the finale. So it was that Mariner and the Klingon having their fight/talk?
No, that was the last episode.
Okay, crap. What was the inner fight then? Now I can't remember.
Well, it's the mom, the captain, is giving her all the easy missions, and she's mad about it. And granted, I watched it 2 weeks ago, so
okay. So I guess I remember it starts.
You watched it this fucking morning. You should.
I know. Well, it starts with the mom calling them all into the meeting and saying we need to keep her safe because she's acting crazy or whatever. But then I can't remember what happened in that episode versus what happened in the finale. It's all running together in my head.
Sure.
Sorry.
All right, Sarah, do you have any thoughts on this episode?
No, I mean it was not one of the more memorable episodes, I think, in Issa's defense. Like I watched it about a week ago, and it was just kind of one of those episodes that was there. So I didn't have an opinion one way or the other.
All right. Then the finale, which I will say that I watched these two back to back. I didn't even get to episode 9 the week it came out. I think, I don't know, maybe no, it wasn't the book tour. It was, oh yeah, it was traveling for Carrie's birthday. So that's why I didn't see it right away. So I saw them both like when I got back from our trip to Ojai. And I remember that seeing them back to back, they seem to work pretty well together, which I usually watch week to week. And I thought the last episode being a sequel to the ultimate first Lower Decker story of Wesley in the academy was a really great choice. I thought, the jokes about like, don't you think he looks like Tom Paris? I don't see it. It was hilarious. Don't know Issa, that character.
I didn't get that part. I wasn't
okay. So the actor who played the character on TNG They just cast him as Tom Paris in Voyager and just ignored the
I-
fact
Yeah, because
that he had,
this is before the internet, really. I mean, the internet existed, but details. And so they didn't really expect that anyone would really notice, I think.
That's really funny. I didn't get that. Now I get
Oh
it.
yeah.
yeah. And part of the joke, or one of the weird things about that, is that when he was cast in Voyager and his backstory was very similar to the character that he played on TNG.
It was legitimately confusing for those of us who did remember him.
Yes, because I just assumed it was the same character for a long time. And then I went back
The
and watched
question, why not just make him the same character? I don't know.
Well, that's part of the joke and the thing about it is because a lot of people are like, why wasn't he just the same character? Because he had pretty much the same backstory. So all the in jokes about that were pretty funny. And the idea that the setup, the parallels and reversals, and everybody knows I like parallels and reversals. And so the parallel that this guy who's a convicted criminal basically for being a lower decker creates a lower decks empire basically is hilarious. And it's smart writing that your big bad enemy that you were setting up as a mystery the whole time is actually a spin on the idea of the show itself. And like a guy angry about being dismissed as a lower decker basically is really smart writing. It's a really clever idea. It's when
they did such a bad job of building up to it. Like it really could have been really good, but I feel like we didn't get any build up to that at all. Like that's not how you introduce a big bad in the season finale. Like you
again, but that's because it doesn't think that that's one of its aims as a show.
Yeah,
which
no, right.
I think is
I
a
get
mistake.
it.
I really do. I think that you should, reel this show in a bit and say this is great, but it also needs to make more cohesive sense as a show independently. Just in case someone's watching who's not a huge Star Trek nerd and actually wants some cohesive story structure. But I think they just don't think that's one of the aims of the show.
No, for sure. And I think it's a missed opportunity. Like they did episode 1, you see the first ship get taken. That I forget who it was first, but it's like the Klingons and then the Ferengi, whatever. And then one by one, you see like 3 or 4 or 5 ships get taken, and that's essentially the same teaser every episode.
Yeah.
Then they sort of forgot about that for a while and didn't do it anymore. And then they brought it back that we have these ships missing that we've been assigned to get intel on or whatever with the robots or the evil robots. But it was very like loose. There was no like, it was all kind of just like, I don't know. It was an opportunity that I felt was very missed.
Well, I can say this, that I thought it paid off. What it does is it pays off the people who are Star Trek fans, who are serious Star Trek fans. It tied to the idea of the show. It did a lot of things that I thought were smart, and I had a feeling that if more episodes had that tone, and I know this will be the third time I say this in this episode, but if it had that tone or the first half of Tuvix, I personally think Lower Decks would walk the line better, because I think those of us who like Star Trek, who wanted to like Lower Decks, but just like can't get into the speed of it. And I'm not going to name names, but one of my friends who is an actual Star Trek novelist, who's a very serious Star Trek fan, is conspicuously quiet whenever talking about the episodes of Lower Decks, because
Is that the bathrobe guy?
no, no, John Ordiver actually likes Lower Decks, I think.
I want to add though that I like the first 3 seasons a lot more than I like this last one.
Yeah. And the thing is too, is I think that the show is getting a little stagnant with the concept, and a lot of people feel that they're planning a kind of soft reboot of the concept in the next season by putting the characters into different situations, and I think that would actually be good.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think where it's rough is that you have actors that you've given contracts to and told them that they're going to be a part of the show. And then, so if you focus on the lower deckers, but then don't have the bridge crew and the future thing, then you got a problem. So you got to figure out a way to balance all of it.
One of my complaints is that there's just too much bridge crew. It's turned into just regular Star Trek where, like the Buffy episode, the Zeppo, which I feel like all of Lower Decks is sort of a take on, is the one where Xander, the side character, kind of has his own adventure, and the main characters are doing all the normal stuff that would happen in a normal Buffy episode in the background, and like you barely see any of it. But like every once in a while, like you'll see through a window, you'll see them like fighting a monster or whatever, right? And I thought that was super cool. And Lower Decks used to kind of like, we barely ever know we barely get to see anybody, we barely get to see the bridge crew. But then now it's like they're hanging with the bridge crew constantly, so it's changed its basic premise a lot.
Was it this season where they had Shax and Ransom in the workout costumes with
oh my God, yes. That was so, and honestly, little things like that is why I keep watching, despite the fact that, because I love little moments like that so much that it makes it worth all of the other things that I don't like about the show that I feel like, are missed opportunities.
Yeah, and you got to give Lower Decks credit because they find all like the stupidest moments from Star Trek, and like that stupid fight gear that Riker had to wear in that one episode, and then they have him doing that stuff. And I do appreciate that Lower Decks, like they go back and look for the dumbest shit that Star Trek ever did and bring it back.
Yeah.
And yes, and the workout, the Troy Crusher workout outfits on Shax and Ransom was almost worth all of Lower Decks to see, which is very funny. But yeah, I think, I don't know. I mean, I agree with you, Issa, that I think that for the first 3 seasons they're kind of, I don't know. I just feel like we're treading a little bit of water with like some of the jokes, that it's getting old. And I think to that, there's that I'm a big fan of Will Forte. Like I personally, like, I think MacGruber is super underrated, very funny. And, but that series he did, The Last Man on Earth, is a great example of where the concept was like hilarious in the beginning, but as the show went on, it was just like, there's only so much you could do. This is a movie. This is not a TV show, but he got money for a TV show. So he tried to extend the idea, and it got very not funny, even for a guy who loves Will Forte.
Yeah.
I just, and for example, and I was worried when they did MacGruber as a TV series, if it would work as a whole. And spoiler alert, it's funny.
I have not seen the TV series, so I have to watch that at some point. It was on my list.
I will only say this: the "Who Smelt It Dealt It" scene is one of the moments of comedy genius that is so underrated in that show. You'll remember when I say that. It's worth pulling up on Peacock or wherever the hell it is, and watching it. MacGruber is fucking hilarious. But anyways, so the thing with Lower Decks, I want them to do another season. I want them to do something interesting with it. But, this is the only Star Trek we're getting for a little while here. We're not, because of the strike, we're not getting Star Trek again until I think Discovery is next, or Prodigy season 2, maybe, because depending on, it's coming out from Amazon, not Paramount now.
When are we supposed to get the next?
Why did I feel like it was Netflix?
Oh, well, it found a home. They found a home for Prodigy season 2. So I'm not sure when the next release date for the next Star Trek is.
Prodigy was so good.
It was Netflix, because I remember texting my friend about it and saying, on the one hand, it's been adopted. On the other hand, it's been adopted by the worst parent ever, like the absolute worst parent that you would ever want for any child.
Yeah. Well,
Yes.
it's
Interface, at least the interface for watching stuff will be better than Paramount. So that's exciting.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Well,
Netflix
it's
loves
dope.
to cancel shows that are doing successfully because they're just not quite successful enough. And so I hate
Well,
Netflix.
unfortunately, it's done already, so there's nothing Netflix can do to it, you know, that
Yeah, but I feel like what's going to happen is it's going to come out, it's going to be amazing, and then we're never going to get more of it.
well, at least we'll get a second season, which is better than
Then just one. Yeah.
Better than nothing. Yes.
I still only have one season of Terriers to constantly rewatch every couple of years. So
Still upset about 1899.
yeah.
It's
So
amazing.
Is that a Taylor Swift album?
That was the people who did Dark on Netflix did 1899, and it was this crazy, amazing science fiction thing. And the thing is, because it was made by the people who made Dark, you knew that it was going to have a real ending and that they thought ahead about what they were actually going to do. So I've been robbed.
right. All right. So I think next we'll be back with Discovery. I think is going to be the next thing.
I look forward to defending it.
Yeah. I have you guys seen the short preview that they showed at Comic-Con?
Yeah.
I thought it looked amazing. It's just one
Okay.
action scene. It's just a Burnham action scene, and you should watch it. It's very cinematic. It's very cool. There's a couple things in it that are a little like, I don't know, but it's so good that it made me go, God damn it, why do we have to wait so fucking long for this? I'm excited to see how they wrap up Discovery. We know that they've already put the writers' room together for Starfleet Academy, and that we know Tawny Newsome, is that her name, who plays Mariner, is a writer on Star Trek Academy, Starfleet Academy. And so we'll see how that turns out. I believe Strange New Worlds season 3 is already written, so we'll probably get announcements in the next couple days of when they're all heading back to Toronto. So since the strike is over. And on that note, I did want to bring up, and I mentioned this offline. I listened to a audio drama called No Man's Land, which is a Seven and Rafi audio drama that actually has Michelle Hurd and Jerry Ryan doing their characters. And there's some cringy audio drama moments, but Jerry Ryan is incredibly good in it. Michelle Hurd's not bad in it either, but Jerry Ryan is particularly like really solid in it. And it's a Fenris Ranger story that's set between seasons 1 and 2 of Picard, and kind of deepens their. And it starts off with the audio drama starts off with the scene where Rafi and Seven are just drinking and challenging and saying things like first kiss, first this, first that. And it's worthless.
Does it have lesbian stuff in it?
It does.
Excellent.
Yeah. But well, I mean, the whole scene is a very romantic scene of them sitting outside of Rafi's trailer at Vasquez Rocks that Issa just went to, playing this game, and there is a deep cut Voyager reference in it when Seven talks about her first kiss, because Rafi was like, "But you were a drone for 18 years. Like, how did that happen? And if you've seen Voyager, you know how that's happened." And I was super impressed that this audio drama made reference to a several episode arc of Voyager that explains that. So anyways, I listened to that and I thought it was really cool. But I also, in relation to those two actors, want to shout out Jerry Ryan and Michelle Hurd, because they were fucking leaders hardcore in the actors strike.
Yeah.
And they were also very involved in getting the actors out to support the writers before the SAG strike even started. So they were involved. Now, Michelle Hurd, if you did not know, is the vice president of the Screen Actors Guild. So she is a person of actual huge power in the SAG fight. So the fact that these two women who were part of Star Trek Picard were huge and involved in the strike, it's great.
Yeah.
Jerry Ryan was a strike captain and was not just the Enterprise captain, but a strike captain, and was really getting people out there. And to the point where when the WGA first announced that the strike was over, I saw multiple replies from different actors, not just small time actors, but big time actors, who said it's not over until Jerry Ryan says it's over. And when I saw that and the respect that people were giving that, when Jerry Ryan tells me I'm off the picket line, that is a sign of respect for an actor who went from being like sexist eye candy, on Voyager, to not only making that character so deep and complex and awesome on both shows, but to being a leadership role in the SAG fight. Fucking awesome. Mad respect to Jerry Ryan for that. This very cool Star Trek thing that happened in the real world. So I just wanted to shout that out. Any other Star Trek thoughts you guys want to get out before we move on?
I'm going on the Star Trek cruise in February. It's going to be so nerdy and great.
In the real world, we might get a Starship launch next week, which would be kind of exciting. So fingers crossed.
That's cool. Yeah, I saw that there's a big Bay Area Star Trek con coming up, so I have thought about going to that. Because you can't get me into Vegas for any reason. So
it is a difficult place to visit.
Yes. And so there is that going on. So, and other than
Vegas,
that,
I hate Las Vegas, but apparently it's turned into like a vegan paradise from what I hear.
Well, it's mostly the modern vegan, which we had here for a while. Is pretty good. Those people opened a vegan taco shop here. So, which is interesting, but whatever. Anyways, Vegas is where a lot of the big cons happen. So who's coming to the cruise? Everybody comes, right, Sarah?
Yeah. Pretty much everybody. I mean, obviously the people who don't come to the cons don't go. It would be amazing if Patrick Stewart were going to be on that cruise, but he's obviously not going to be there. But the standard Star Trek actors who go to all the conventions will be there. So,
well, he's got a book to promote. Oh yeah, you went to the book event for Patrick Stewart. Tell us about that real quick before we go.
That was amazing. I cried twice. Yeah. He just he's a wonderful human being, and it's kind of this weird thing for me because TNG premiered when I was 8, and because it was such a formative time in my life and it was such a powerful character. I loved Captain Picard when I was a kid. And so it's one of those rare pleasures that you get in life. Usually when you meet the actors behind characters that you love, they're going to disappoint you. And Patrick Stewart is in so many ways like Picard. And he's talked about this. He talks about it in his book, he did not know when he ended and Picard began by the time the show stopped running, the original. And so it's like, he's just a wonderful, wonderful human being. And, so it was just, and he's got great stories, and he had a really, difficult but charming childhood. Like he talks about like men going up and down lighting the lamps on the streets. And so he had like a Victorian childhood. So, it's a charming read, and everybody, the audiobook and I have like 3 copies of the physical book because I pre-ordered a copy, and I went to the events where they give you copies, and then I got the audio version. So, and it's really wonderful.
Does he read he read the audiobook?
Yeah, he talked about that in the talk where he was kind of like, saying, oh, the poor producer that was putting this together, because he was very heavily involved in, no, I don't like the way I said that. And, you can tell like he put a lot of thought into the recording, and it's a wonderful recording in and of itself. So
Yeah. Well, audiobooks are different. It is different when you read something out loud, but I
yeah.
will just say in the Science Fiction Hall of Fame, the story from 1934, the Mars Odyssey, there's a sentence where somebody, and I'm going to post a picture of this, where he describes somebody instead of, he says, I could have fixed it. And it says ejaculate, the engineer, it says ejaculated. And I was listening to, I was like, even in 1934, what? And then I listened to an audiobook version of it, and they changed it to exploded the engineer. And I was like, even in 1934, come on. They had to have known better.
I feel like I've read that in books much more recently than 1934.
Well, yeah, this came out in the 70s, but that story was from 1934. So
No, I mean, like, I remember in school at some point you had to come up with like all the different ways of not saying "said." He said every time you were writing something.
yeah.
Ejaculated was definitely one of the words that we could choose.
No.
It was, yeah.
No.
The 80s, I guess it would have been.
All right. Well, that's something people got if they lasted this long. All right. So we'll be back for Discovery. In the meantime, Sarah, how can folks find you if they want to? Or do you want them to?
Facebook.
Yeah. Issa, you don't want people to find you.
Me too. They'll find me on Facebook if it's meant to be.
Yeah, you'll be back for the top movies of the year episode. I might be expanding to one other person.
Okay. Sounds good.
But yeah, so we'll be talking about which Marvel movies you liked this year. So we'll get that in. And Sarah and, well, both of you, we got to do Arena in this one, and we'll see how the story is different from the episode that was filmed where you went to, Issa. What were you doing in Vasquez Rocks? Just out for a
I had
hike?
a friend in town who's a Star Trek fan, so we went.
Ah, all right. Well, I've been in town and a Star Trek fan with you, and we never went.
Have you never been?
I've never been. So
Oh, I just assumed that you'd like been there many, many times. Dude, next time you're here, we'll go.
yeah. All right.
It's like an hour outside of downtown LA.
Yeah. Well, of course it is. That's where you go to fight Gorn, right? Exactly. All right. On that note, folks, we'll see you again in the future. Thanks for listening to our Star Trek panel. There's at least 3 people who wrote me and asked me when this was happening, because hey, it's been done for a week now, and I was like, oh, hey, so you're actually mad. Good. Our opinions are coming, is what I basically said. So thank you folks for listening who do, and keep it positive with Star Trek. And Janeway was right. So yeah, Janeway was right. And no one's ever going to convince me that Tuvix was murdered. So on that note, later folks.